know, again, what are we looking at here? We're looking at the Buddhist teachings. Buddha, this person who lived in India a couple of 100,000 years ago, and he presented his view of the universe. I mean, there's lots of people like that. If you think of it, one thing, I mean, you think of it, since humans, as long as we've been around, we clever humans with our clever conceptual minds, isn't it? We spend time coming up with views about how things are. We call it, in this fancy Greek word, we call that philosophy or whatever, psychology. We come up with ideas about how the world exists, which is totally appropriate. We've got to use our thinking mind for that. So, so there's so many views, and I think it's really important. I think there's such a lot. It's so important to kind of have this, to honor these humans over the centuries and centuries of humans, with all these different views. I mean, I always think of the Australians, these 40,000 years or so, they say that these Australians, these people have been there before these white English people came along 200 years ago or something, maybe 200, maybe 300 nearly. And the same in the United States, maybe 400 years ago. Before that, there were people there, there were people there. And of course, in Europe, it's exactly the same. 1,000 years ago, there were people before that. So, but, the people have been coming up with ideas about the universe. So the Australians, the original people there, I mean, who knows who was there before the 40,000? This is the point. And so I mean, you hear their views. They were kept intact for these 40,000 years and developed this astonishing view. I mean, they call about dream time. I really do not comprehend it. It's so complex. It's so unusual. It's such a radically different view of the universe. Well, that's the world. And every month another person comes up with another idea about the universe because we clever humans never stop thinking. So our job, I suppose, because we're all asking the same questions, what makes us come up, think about it. What would make a human being come up with a view about something? It's because you've thought about it. You look at it and you go, why? This is the point. We go, why, and then we come up with a view. So that's what we call science as well, because if we're sort of a little bit arrogant and a bit, modern people, we tend to assume that it's only recently that clever people, which we label scientists, another Greek word, they're the ones who are realistic. Everybody else is kind of living in la-la land, But I mean, it's kind of arrogant, isn't it? It's really arrogant to think that. As if, I mean, that's just arrogance to think that we in the last 100 years, 200 years are the clever ones who come up with the reality. The rest are just weirdo people who are called religious. I mean, that's just absurd. So anyway, here we are talking about Buddha. That's all. That's one of the many views on the planet. And indeed, if you start studying Buddhism, you're going to find 10,000 different interpretations. I mean, one of the texts you study in the Tibetan monastic university system, which is directly from this great Indian monastic university system called the Nalanda monastery, as Dalai Lama always says, we are the Nalanda tradition. As Buddhism started to decline in India, 6th, 7th, 8th century, so on, it kind of picked itself up in these Tibetans and the Indians or whatever went, and then it became steady in Tibet, rooted there, So, what did I say? I've got lost the plot. I talk so much, I can't think what I'm saying. I need an editor in my head. Anyway, yeah, these are viewpoints. They are simply viewpoints. That's right. If you study, there's a text called Buddhist Tenets. And even now there should be another one because that's coming from India, where it's a presentation up, of all the different viewpoints, like a map of the different viewpoints on a set of some fundamental points that have developed since the time of the Buddha. And there are probably 27 variations of it, divided into 4 schools of thought, then all the sub-schools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, for example, the Theravadan Buddhists, the Buddhists that we find in Burma and Thailand and so on, that's the only remaining of one of the 18 sub-schools of one of the particular schools of thought. So it's all been kind of mapped out, which is marvelous. And so one of the things that one studies, in particular in relation to the nature of self, in particular in relation to the ultimate way that things exist, Buddha's teachings about emptiness, there are so many different viewpoints, and it is fascinating to study it. And they're also related to different levels of mind, So it's just fascinating. And I think we have to have a very open mind to hearing all these different views, including the Christians, including the white supremacists, including the wackos, But of course, we get so stuck in our own view, and then we have a panic attack as soon as we hear somebody who disagrees with us. I mean, we all like that. And so we should look at the reason why. And that's because of ego grasping, this very powerful, intense, fear-based clinging to a view of I, which then makes up its own views about everything else. And then they're set in stone. And this is the key source of all the problems, You can't even hear somebody else's view. I mean, if you're, you're into, say, like you hear, let's say you've got a certain view about race and you hear about a white supremacist. I mean, as soon as you hear a person talking, you have a panic attack. I mean, we've got to be grown up, you know. I mean, there are all kinds of weirdo people on the planet, and there are all kinds of wonderful people on the planet. We should have a big view and have a view that, as a view that, I mean, I'm not talking about impermanence here now, but I'm going to get to it. But this is a powerful point. We've got to calm down, you know. Just because a person has a view and they speak out their mouth and we have a panic attack, I mean, this is why we suffer so badly. This is why we suffer so badly, because our attachment isn't getting what it wants. We might be right. We might have a very noble view. We might be really a wonderful human being with wonderful human views about everybody is equal, blah, 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 you know. But if we are like that, we should be open. Doesn't mean that they're right. There could be a wacko. There are plenty of wacko views. But the fact that we can freak out as soon as we hear a view that doesn't agree with ours, even if we're right, that's our problem, you know. So we've got to get a bit grown up and know that the world is full of all kinds of people with all kinds of views, including your white supremacists and your terrorists and your this and your that. We've got to be a bit braver, you know. So anyway, that's part of the thing, and that's all about attachment as usual, same old talk. But one of the teachings, one of Buddha's first presentations of how things exist, Buddhism is simply, like I said, a view from his perspective of how things exist. That's a good point. It's an interesting point. It's a powerful point to remember. What is it that would make us want to find a view that we use as the basis for interpreting our life? Like if you decide to be a Christian, you're buying into Jesus Christ's views of the world. So of course there are 47 varieties. We know that. So let's say you're a Catholic Christian, or you're a Greek Christian, or you're a Baptist Christian, or whatever. Even among the Baptists, there are 47 views. We know that. So we should look at the question. This is very fascinating, actually. What is it that makes us? Why is it? What is it? What do we do with a view? Okay, why would you want a view, and what do you do with it when you get it? So whether the view is mathematics, you'd like to learn about the way mathematics works. It's a viewpoint about certain ways the world works. That's all it is. What do you do with it? And math's a good example. We know when it comes to science, scientific views, as we call them, they're views that are practical. This is a really good point. They're views that are practical. So what do you do with math? It's a really important point. What do you do with these views? You put them in your head, you learn them, and then you apply them. That's what you should do with all views. What's the point of having a bunch of views in your head and they just sit there as a bunch of views? You go nuts. So this is the point about science, yes. And that's the point that Buddha's making. And that's anybody. If you're going to be a Christian, it means you're buying into the views of Jesus Christ, whether it's the Baptist or the Catholic ones, and then you need to apply those views, not just have them in your head. That's our big problem. So what are you going to do with the Buddhist views? Well, but what's Buddha telling us? Let's look at Buddha's views. Okay, he tells us, one of the first things he tells us, you know what, folks, things change. And we'll go, duh, mate, we don't need to be told that. We know that. Well, he's not making anything up. He's not a creator. That's the big point. He's not, and that's the biggest point, the biggest difference I would suggest in our views about the difference between scientific views of the world and religious philosophical views of the world. But they both should be the same. They both should be a valid view about how things exist, which you then apply. And then even what's the point of it? Then what's the point of it? Well, this is the Buddhist point. The only reason to change your views in your head about how things exist, the only reason to get in touch with that things change, isn't just to believe what Buddha says and shove it in your head. I believe in impermanence. You've got to apply it, like math. And this is the point for the Buddha. This is the point for the Buddha. He is saying the extent to which the views in our head are not in touch with how things exist is the extent to which we suffer. This is the point. Now, that's what we have to investigate. So, in other words, the only reason to listen to Buddha is to listen to what he says, check it out. Well, that's interesting. He says things are impermanent. He says things change all the time. Let me look at that. And then you start to notice that you live in la-la land and can't stand the thought that something will change, especially if it's a good thing. You love the bad things changing. So then you start to realize, well, that's practical, isn't it? Look at me. What is it in me that makes me so afraid that when I've got a lovely thing, Like I always quote, you know, Nicole Kidman. I love the woman, but I just got such a powerful interview when she was with Tom Cruise and they were in love. Everything was perfect. I'm not being sarcastic. Listen to this. And she said, we will be together until we are 80. That's what happens when you find the right job, the right boyfriend, and you go, now, wow, now I've found happiness. That statement, now I've found it. She articulated it one step further. We will be together until we are 80. That's grasping at things as unchanging. Right there. And that's how we live our lives. And all Buddha's saying is that's why we suffer, babies. So that's what you got to look into. So the only reason to change, to look into how you think about things is if the way you think now causes you to be miserable, then honey child, you've got the wrong view. That's what they talk about, wrong views in Buddhism. Not fun, not being moralistic, practical. It's like believing that 1 + 1 is 3. It ain't. And every time you go to spend, you know, every time you think 1 + 1 is 3, or every time you think your $5 is 50 or whatever, you'll always be disappointed because it's not in touch with reality. This is the point across the board from here to enlightenment for the Buddha. And that's the basis for wanting to look into it, because you want to be happy. We would never, I mean, we hope with scientific development, discovering new things, it's a method to bring happiness. That's what motivates good scientists to want to make people happy. We've got to check if that happens. That's the really big point, you know. So the Buddha's point is, you know, the method to get happy and to stop suffering, the method is to get wisdom, to have your mind in sync with how things exist. So I mean, it sounds kind of noble, how things exist. What the hell does that mean, you know? We'll start with impermanence. It's staring you in your face. It's evident to anybody with half a brain that things change. This is the point. And then you check, well, is that how I feel? Well, you know it intellectually, but look at the disconnect. And this is a major reason. Forget about not realizing karma. Forget about not understanding your mind. Forget about not realizing emptiness. Forget about not having bodhicitta. They're more advanced views that we are trying to internalize. Just this one alone can bring a profound effect in your life. That you're changing moment by moment. Things change moment by moment. They're uncertain. So and that's why we suffer so badly, because we can't stand the thought of impermanence. That's why we cling so frantically like vampires. And then as soon as we hear something that, you know, in the next second, you know, it bumps up against this grasping at things as permanent. So we've got to look at that instinct within us that's so terrified of things changing. And of course, we've got to also, when we start to study the Buddhist view and we start to look at attachment, for example, we start to look at the other parts of our mind, we're going to see it's this clinging to something being permanent. For example, we will be together until we're 80 is very linked to attachment. We have to understand that, and that will help us understand more. So attachment, as we talk endlessly, is this emotional hunger in us that only, this is the thing, only wants the nice things. That's the junkie in us that only wants the nice things. So then you have alongside that, you have this grasping at things as unchanging. So obviously, Nicole or Fred or whoever, any one of us, when you're in love and the life is perfect and everything's beautiful, the money's there, the job is there, you got friends, you got the kids, you got your life, you know, wake up every morning and still things are there and you keep living. It feels, I mean, it's wonderful. Attachment is getting what it wants. So then, because all this is instinctive, you can't stand the thought that it won't be like that tomorrow it might be different. Then we live in terror. Some people just live in terror of change, can't stand even, but what if this happens? What if that happens? So people have become so paralyzed, even just today, even though everything is nice today, kind of this it's unbearable to think it won't be like that tomorrow. So then we put this fantasy on top, because it's delicious today, because everything was perfect today, because the family were there, the husband was there, the kids were there, the life was there, the job was there, everything's lovely. This is one aspect, one way some people respond. This is the example, we'll be together till we're 80. Then because it's delicious today, that person, I don't want to be rude about Nicole, I love the woman. She we project, therefore it won't change. That's the illogic of ego, because we can't stand the thought of change. Now, another kind of person, also, we've all got attachment and want only the lovely things. But another kind of person is a person who's thinking that nothing will last. So they're the other extreme. Well, nothing will last. And all they do is see all the dramas. Oh my God, what happens if this happened? And what if that? And what if I lose it? And what if I lose my money? What if my husband leaves me? What if this? What if that? Every second you go crazy. That's another aspect of the same problem. I remember a woman on one teaching who thinks, she said, I think all the time that my husband will die. What can I do? Well, you know, the first thing many people say is, don't be ridiculous. Of course, he's not going to die. Well, excuse me. No. I said, well, of course he's going to die. I said, well, why not think, and this is sometimes too unbearable, he will die. This is fact. You can't argue with it. It is fact. He will die. Now, whether he's 70 or 7, and this is the heavy duty level of impermanence, we can't even be certain that a person is going to live until their middle age or old age. That's the assumption we have, you know, don't forget about being together till we're 80. So the idea that a person won't be there, that a person will die on me, not just leave me, but die, this is so horrific for us. So I said, well, you know, one approach is be very direct and very blunt and very brave and say to yourself, well, you know what, sweetie pie, he will die, but I don't know when. So then what do you do with that? You make the most of it. If you know that something, this is the general point about impermanence, when you know that things change, you know, when you know that things change, yes, tomorrow your house might burn down. I mean, a friend of mine, she lived in Marin County. She went off with her husband one day into the city, to San Francisco, comes back, and what's left is just a burnt hole. I mean, you don't believe, you can't believe it. Oh, excuse me, my house was just there a minute ago. What happened? Well, it burnt down, baby. Things change, you know. This is too scary for us. It is too scary. I mean, and the way I say it, I'm so blunt, must be more scary. So I said, think that he is impermanent. And then when you see it in a good way, because things do change, not just tomorrow, but second by second, things are changing. It's just the nature of the universe. Then you value it more. You value him more. Therefore, you make the most of him every second, and you be kind and patient and loving and delight that you have him. And then when you wake up in the morning and you feel his body and it's still warm, it's a bonus. And you make the most of the next day. This is the real way to live our lives, and there won't be fear then. But this is the thing, either you believe you're going to be together till you're 80 and you stay in this little kind of permanent bubble, or you live in constant panic attack. Every second things will change. I could lose my house. I could be thrown out. You could die. This could happen. And that's the panic that some people do have. That's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. But the reality is things do change. So we make the most of what we've got when we've got it. So to neither live in the denial that it's going to be permanent forever, nor live in this total panic every second. And they're the two extremes we have, isn't it? It's to sort of learn to be more realistic and more courageous. So when you know, every second you appreciate, you realize that what you've got, and this is now the view of karma, we keep adding all the pieces in, you know, this is the Buddhist view. Then you just don't take your life for granted. You don't take yourself for granted. You don't take your life for granted. You don't take Tom for granted. You don't take your husband for granted. You don't take your house for granted. If you have anything, even 5 cents, what happens is, because attachment is this junkie that is getting what it wants, we have this hubris of thinking, oh, well, I'll just take it for granted. We take it for granted. Don't take it for granted. Every second anything good happens, it's the fruit of your past virtue. Your past generosity is the cause of why you have access even to $1. The past generosity is the cause of why you have access to food. You've still got a house. You get a salary. It's like a miracle. Never take it for granted. The fact that you have a lovely husband who's kind and loving, that's because of your past virtue towards him. So you don't take it for granted. Therefore, the conclusion is you use it well, and you delight in it, but you realize it's impermanent. That's why the analogy of a garden is so good. I mean, a garden, let's say, full of veggies. If you look at the veggies and you forget that you planted them, and this is the point about our lives, we don't remember that we planted this pleasure, that we have this life, this body, this money in the bank, this to the care that we're being receiving, the medical care, the help that we have. We don't think of it as the fruit of our past virtue. We just look at it's like looking at your veggie garden and forgetting that you planted it. And you go, oh, look at all those veggies, all those cauliflowers, all those carrots. And then all you do is see all the mistakes about it. And you don't ever think that you planted them. And what do? You just greedily eat them all up. And then you wonder why there's none left. You got to keep planting more. Every second you eat, you've got your veggies, you grew them, you never forget it. You value your past hard work. You value every carrot, every cauliflower. But as soon as you eat one, you put another one in. Then you keep the garden growing. This is abiding by the laws of karma. This is seeing things as impermanent, and this is looking at and giving up attachment and fears. So all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. When we talk in this casual way, this is applying the teaching about impermanence, implying the teaching about karma, implying the teaching about giving up attachment, giving up aversion. And it's implying the teaching about emptiness, and nothing has an intrinsic nature. Slowly. So the reason to have a view in your head about the world has to be a view that'll help you get happier, and therefore help you help others. If it does the opposite, honey, it's the wrong view. That's a very good criterion, I tell you. If the views that you've got increase your self-centeredness, increase your misery, increase your unhappiness, then obviously you're on the wrong track. That's a really good way to put it. So we look into what we think and why we think it, and just swallow it whole, Anyway, sweetie pies, that's 25 minutes I've talked. Good enough. Now ask me some questions. Come on. Please, dearest people, ask me some questions. Any old questions? What's come up recently? Anything in your lives you want to talk about? Especially if it relates to what I said, which is, all the points of the path, really. Any questions? No. Zala looks like he's about to ask a question. Are you? Go on then, just turn it on. Good. Ask me the question.
It's more of a technical or general question, not specifically about myself.
Okay, good.
Why does contact with objects of the five senses trigger pleasure?
Why?
Why?
Well, the way to look at it is the Buddhist explanation of the evolution of this species that we are in this, from his point of view, not just humans, but all of us, all the sentient beings in what he calls the desire realm, which incorporates not just humans and animals, but many other kinds of beings. And so all these different beings in this samsara that Buddha has observed to exist, many other kinds of beings, there's this structured in such a way that we're these sentient beings that they're all the desire realm, which is another word for attachment. So as a consequence of attachment, we have, over many eons of lifetimes, in our case, we have a particular kind of physical body that's connected to our mind. So the makeup of this body and the combination of this body and this mind, given that we've got attachment is this primordial emotional hunger that feels it's missing something and is always wanting something more. And that's what's caused us, because of gross attachment to sensory objects. That's the actual cause of having a body of the five senses. This is not coming from some creator. It's not coming from some external cause. The cause of this is the mind and its attachment in particular from eons of practice that we've literally created over, sort of like karma's like personal evolution. We've created a body that has these five senses, or if you like, five holes that demand feeding. So they've been created by attachment over eons of time that affect the mind, and because the tantric model of the mind and the body is we have this subtle wind energy, which is the four elements. We have the four elements, and all minds are connected to the four elements. So everything we do with our mind impacts upon the four elements, which is our body. So we've created these five senses. So the mind, the Buddha's observation of the mind, it's made up of all these neurotic, deluded states of mind, the main one of which is attachment in day-to-day life. Then we've got the virtuous states of mind. But then we have these other states of mind that are kind of, got many things in there that are neither good nor bad, but are necessary. And one in there is called literally feeling. And the way the mind is, no one made it like this. It's just the way it is we've got the capacity to have happy feelings, unhappy feelings, and neutral feelings. Pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings, neutral feelings. We'll forget about the neutral. We focus in on the happy or the pleasant or the joyful or for the blissful, happy feelings. Feelings is the mind. That's called happiness. So then we've got the unhappy feelings. So now we know, having these senses, this body, that if you know someone stabs you, that will trigger, because of the way the mind and the body are connected, and because of the intensity of attachment, and therefore the intensity of what's present in our mind called aversion, when attachment doesn't get what it wants. When a knife stabs your nerves, you will experience intense sensory consciousness of unpleasant feelings, and your mind will have a panic attack. So this is just the way it is. So, but the answer to the question isn't, why we want a big capital W-Y and a big capital R reason. Why did God sort of create it like this? There's no view like that. It's an evolutionary thing. And the way to understand it is to understand the Buddhist view of the mind and how it's constructed, the Buddhist view of what the senses are, and the evolution of karma. So combining all of these together, when attachment doesn't get what it wants, that triggers unpleasant feelings called suffering, and when attachment gets what it wants, that triggers very pleasant feelings. I mean, that's one bit of analysis. I don't know, does that help? It's the way it is. It's not, when we ask a question why, we often ask, why did it become like this? Why did it begin that way? But there's no concept like that. Everything's for, beginningless and endless. So it's like the scientific view of analyzing botany to discover why the earth and the water and the air work together like that. You've got to look at all the dependent arising conditions of the mind, karma, the situation, and then you're going to get the answer by understanding the technology of what the mind is, what the body is, and how they interact. So you've got to study the Buddhist views to get the answer to it. I'm trying to just summarize the answer. Does that help at all, Zalo?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so the problem with this is that we, for so long, Buddha says, for many countless lifetimes, we have been buying into the belief that the method to get happy feelings, and the Buddha's saying, honey, there's nothing wrong with happy feelings. In fact, I've got a really good method of how to get such happy feelings, you won't believe it. But we're so moralistic, we hear happy feelings and it sounds like a sin. So we think we've got to give up happiness when we hear they've got to give up attachment. Complete mistake. But we think the method to get happy feelings is to get an object of the senses. And all he's saying is getting a cake, getting a nice boyfriend, does trigger some happy feelings, but they're very limited, they're quite polluted, and they don't last. That he says the better method to get happy feelings, the first level, is to stop doing negative things and try to stop having anger and jealousy and pride and panic, because they trigger very unhappy feelings. And then slowly developing your mind to have more and more virtuous states of mind, like love and compassion and wisdom and kindness, because they trigger happy feelings. And then eventually, by giving up attachment and then by realizing emptiness, you have tapped into the natural potential of your mind to be totally blissful naturally. So that's the Buddhist answer to it all. Does that make sense, Zana?
Yeah, it makes sense. I think the question was, like you just said, when you have contact with the cake, you that triggers a pleasure feeling, but it doesn't last. But why does it trigger it?
That's what I'm just telling you. You've got to understand. You're asking me, why does a carrot grow to be orange? That's what you're asking me, isn't it?
Maybe.
What do you mean, maybe? You're right. You're asking me, why is a carrot that way? That means, what are you going to, you have to study the science, you have to study the way the air works, you have to study the combination of air and weather and all of those things to discover what it is that makes a carrot orange. That's what you're asking. So you got to study the Buddhist mechanics of the mind and the body and karma. That's what I'm telling you. You want a sort of a big capital W-Y. It's the mechanics of it. The mind and the combination of mind and body and our karma and the way the mind works, they're the things you have to study, and they will give you the answer. That's up to you. And I tried to give you a summary of the answer, but obviously it didn't work.
Oh, yes, it worked. It worked.
So you've got to study the mechanics of it. It's like it's a logical, practical thing, which is why the more you study, the more you have to study the mechanics of the mind, the mechanics of the physical world, and how they link together and the way things work. That's what the level of drilling down that you need to do if you really study Buddhism seriously, which is what they study in the Tibetan monastic university system, the nuts and bolts of all this stuff. Do you understand, Zalo?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Good.
thank you very much.
Good. Okay. What else, people? Something else? Any more questions? Nothing.
Venerable Robina, there's one question in the chat.
Yes.
And, oh, sorry. The question is how to handle rejection.
Okay, good question, yes. So again, like I said to Zalo, let's look into the mechanics of this, Rejection is when there's a person in our life, presumably we have a relationship with. Hang on, I've got to fix my computer here. Something's gone wrong. But my little stand, it's not standing properly. What's going on? I need a new stand. It's not working nicely. Sorry, people, hang on. There it is. Okay, so rejection. So there's a relationship, and inside us, inside the person being rejected, we have to take as a given, using this Buddhist analysis, that there's a very deeply instinctive emotional hunger for approval. That's very logical. So that's attachment, and that's the deepest attachment. So in other words, if you've got attachment to a chocolate cake, then what will happen if the cake tastes ugly is sort of like you got disappointed. That's like, it's like the cake rejected you. So there's disappointment when the object meets your attachment. So the same here, there's attachment, in this case, a deeper one than just want a sensory pleasure, a deeper attachment, the deepest attachment in all of us, that underneath everything, primordially deep until we're quite advanced, is the attachment to, okay, broadly, attachment wants to get what it wants. So when attachment is there for the chocolate cake and the cake fits your attachment, you get some pleasure. If your attachment is there that wants approval from that person, and we don't often notice we've got that attachment, that's the problem. So the neediness to be approved of, and when the person doesn't give you that, that could just be the next door neighbor looking mean at you. Forget about your beloved boyfriend. Then we are shattered. So that's attachment not getting what it wants. Attachment getting what it doesn't want. And because attachment to approval, we don't notice this, I think, deep in the bones of our being. It's so primordial. It's the deepest attachment we all have. They say it's the last attachment to go. There was a story about the yogi, this sort of anecdotal thing. Like there's this, the Tibetan yogi up in the mountains who's given up everything, given up sex, drugs, rock and roll, really renounced, really working on their mind. But they're still thinking of what the people in the village are thinking about them. That's attachment to being approved of. And it sounds kind of gross to be approved. You just think you're just trying to have a nice friend. You got your lovely friend. You like to talk to each other. It's so nice to have a friend. It doesn't even be your boyfriend. It's a friend. And you ring up and she says hello and you say hello and you laugh at each other's jokes. And then one day, suddenly it seems to change and she doesn't answer your phone call or she sounds a bit cold. I mean, we are shattered. This isn't the suffering of every day. Look at little children in the playground, And this is the point the Buddha's making. And this is how it sounds so cruel, because we just think it's normal. We don't think of it as coming from any mistake in our mind. And this is all Buddha saying why we suffer. So some children, I mean, we practically think they're autistic if they're like this. Some children are very content in themselves. They don't have a yearning to be, loved and stroked every second in the playground. They're very content in themselves. And this is what's an interesting point. I think in our culture, we so take it as a given that we've all got this, what Buddhism would call attachment to being approved of, and we consider it a healthy thing. We mix it with the good part of us. And so we assume we have to develop as social beings by learning in the playground how to be rejected, how to be, and it's true, we do have to learn. But the Buddha, I mean, like you've got some, there's one little girl I know who was said to be a reincarnation of a previous Lama. And she was always very shy and very quiet, very self-contained. She was considered mentally ill because she didn't want to have little friends in the playground, or she didn't burst into tears and have a tantrum when someone took her toy. She's not mentally ill. The others are. The normal is mentally ill. The normal is having a tantrum when your toy is taken. But we just go, oh, that's normal. But that's the sign of intense lack of self-contentment. We think you have to grow that, but you can also get born with it from past practice. That's the Buddha's point. So it's a very deep one inside us. And if we suffer terribly in our lives because we get rejected, people talk about, like you say, maybe your mother gave you away when you're born. You always seem to have relationships that break up, you know, and you're always feeling so injured and brokenhearted. This is attachment. It's so primordially deep, and we shouldn't criticize ourselves for it. It's like a revelation to understand it, but to know that we can heal it. We don't need to suffer so badly, but this is really hard work, you know. So in other words, it's to question, not just to take it for granted, oh, that's just normal, you're going to get hurt if you get rejected. No, don't. We say it's normal, meaning you'd be weird if you didn't have it. No, Buddha's view more radical. A really advanced person spiritually is a person who doesn't have this yearning to be approved of by everybody all the time, because they're approving of themselves. They're fully content in themselves, but they're wonderful friends to have. They're not going to be isolated. They're compassionate, they're kind, they're empathetic, they're generous. They don't take to everything personally because they're thinking more of others. But you can't think more of others if you're overwhelmed by this neediness to be approved of. And that's why we're lonely. That's why we get depressed about these things. Some people don't have it, but some people have it very extremely. And we suffer terribly because we're watching every second for people to approve of us. I mean, you think about even you're on the driving on the freeway, and a stranger whose face you can't even see toots his horn. You have a panic attack. Someone just disapproved of you and you don't even see their face. Look how upset we get. Look how fearful we get. So insulted, you know. A person in the shop, we will never see them again. They look mean at us. We are so offended. This shows how fragile we are. It shows how needy we are. It shows how we lack our own sense of self to such a degree that we don't think we have any value until someone else approves of us. This is our suffering, people. I hope that answers the question. So how do you heal it? By seeing it first. You can't solve a problem if you can't first identify it. And it's called attachment. And of course, don't hold your breath. It's going to take a while to go. But at least to have the analysis of why is really helpful, you know. Yes, Greg. Hello.
Hi, thank you, Venerable.
Good.
I have something, so I've had to practice the idea of just letting go of any a future idea of my life. My son dropped out, moved out. So the next 5 years that I thought I'd have are gone.
Okay.
So I've really
out of the blue.
All of a sudden out of the blue. It was very rapid. And in the last few months.
Very painful as well.
Well, the practice that I've put in these ideas and understanding that this is how it is has actually just eased the pain so much. So
good. Fantastic.
I just wanted to hear your ideas on that and yeah.
Well, I mean, you made a very broad statement, so I'm only assuming that everything we're talking about is what you're trying to apply, that things are impermanent, that karma ripens, that relationships end. That's what you're talking about, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Your son rejected you or just moved out? I mean, that was, if
I haven't talked to him.
Okay, that's where, so, I mean, this is where, when we talk about like my analysis just before about what happened, how do you analyze rejection? When we do the analysis, it always sounds very brutal, like as if, oh, I'm a bad person. I shouldn't be like that. But we can't, I know you're not saying that. We can't think that way. We've got to really want to know underneath what's going on inside our mind.
I certainly feel that.
Yes.
it creeps in. And that's what the
Well, of course it
practice
does. It's
is then
natural.
examining.
That's right. It's natural. And because we have close relationships, Greg, because we give birth to people, I mean, I kind of think of a closer relationship than that, giving birth to a human being. It's unbelievable. I mean, forget about the physical connection, but we've got obviously the Buddhist view, you've got a strong karmic history with that person from the past. So there's a karmic debt involved there. And especially a parent, since this tiny child you've nurtured and loved and taken care of, then suddenly this person rejects. I mean, I can't imagine that pain. I mean, I've talked to so many parents, for example, whose children have rejected. I can't think of a more painful one. I can't even imagine that, when a mother and a father have given their life and then they're rejected by the child. This is one of the commonest sufferings on our planet. It's unbearable. So the pain is inevitable because of the strong karmic connection, and it's inevitable because of the karmic connection, you've got the attachment. So it takes a real lot of work. Not just to hide, you can't hide the pain, have the pain, but know the logic of it, and slowly, by thinking about impermanence, understanding karma, and then taking all that as grist to the mill for your practice to help you give up the delusions. It's a very marvelous practice if we can do it, Well done, Greg, is all I can say. Cassia, what's your point, darling?
So when you were just talking about attachment, what are some antidotes that you can apply, that we could apply to very strong attachment?
I mean, it depends. I don't want to be too personal again, but it depends on if it's a person, if it's sex, if it's food, which one of those?
More of approval, like when you were talking
Yeah,
about
there you
approval.
go.
That was interesting. I hadn't heard of like this seeking approval
Yes.
as attachment. And I think that's very
Fascinating,
deep for
isn't it, to
me.
hear it?
So
It is
big.
fascinating to hear it like that, isn't it?
Yeah, kind of is just blowing my mind, because it's like
Yep.
with relationships, like
Yep.
with friendships at work, and like
Yep.
just the whole 9 yards. That's what
Yep.
I'm thinking
Exactly, darling, exactly. So that's why that's where I think, because it's so primordial in every being, I would suggest that in our psychological models, we do assume it's a normal part of a normal person. Are you seeing my point here? So it is a normal part of a normal person. But I think the way I like to say it is Buddha's view of what we can accomplish is more radical than we can assume we can accomplish. And we all understand in our culture that we have to learn to become our own person and give up this painful neediness for other people to love us all the time. We understand it in our own psychology too. But when the Buddhist one is so much more radical, we can give up attachment to a subtler degree. So, it's to even recognize, and it's just what you said shows very clearly that you're thinking it now freshly in a different way. So the general idea to understand attachment is it's this hunger in us. It's an emotional hunger that always, and this is a really brutal way to put it, but it's a very good one. It only ever wants the nice things. So clearly the nice things means the food that you want, the sounds that you want, the weather that you want. Do you understand my point? Everything has to be lovely. So attachment is kind of this junkie that only wants the nice things. And as long as we get the nice things, that's what we call happiness. But the second attachment doesn't get the right cake, the right sound, the right feeling in the body, and certainly the right response from the people out there, that's when the pain starts, So it's really good to see it. So what is a symptom of? This attachment to other people, seeing us as a nice person, is very interesting. You see, because also the other point is it's mixed. I'm so sorry, I have to cough. Forgive me. I don't want to cough. You see, what's interesting, let's look for a second at, say, a little person, a child, let's say a child, who's had a mummy and a daddy who've been mean and nasty and have rejected and harmed and hurt. So you can imagine the hurt in there is unbelievable. You're a little thing, you get born and suddenly you're getting whacked around, So even from the time you're tiny, this attachment is not getting what it wants. So then at the same time, this is why the Buddhist view is quite different in its analysis. We've got these positive states of mind, the virtuous states of mind. So there's a little child who's been harmed and brutalized, but at the same, then they meet a person when they're 6 or 7 or 10 who starts being kind to them. So, you would think, well, then if they've just got attachment to be approved of, why would you be kind to a person? You're just feeding their attachment. Well, no, that's called being kind to somebody. So we can see with a child, there's nothing more incredible than giving them love, giving them kindness, listening to them, not just slamming down on them, listening to what they say, encouraging them to have their own thoughts and feelings. This is the most amazing gift we can give to a child. So that's when, if we are going to be a person who's helping anybody, not just a child, even in a decent relationship, we've got to have this awareness of these two parts of us. So if we're the person helping the child, you've got to be aware, let's say this kid might have a lot of emotional neediness, always crying, always upset, always demanding. That means their emotional neediness is really powerful. That's attachment. Then you've got another child who doesn't have too much of that, and they respond beautifully to your kindness, and they really grow themselves. You allow them to heal. So we shouldn't equate giving someone approval and like stroking them, like we say in a relationship, it's codependence. That's revolting. Codependence is, I'll stroke your back if you strike, whatever you say, so that's feeding each other's attachment. But having the wisdom to be aware of the other person, let's say it's a child, and then you don't always give them approval, because that's just feeding their neurosis, but you also at the same time you give them lots of love and kindness. So we have to know the difference in ourselves between the craving to be approved of and the valid wish to have communication with another human being. I hope I'm being clear here, because these are very separate parts of us. And so when we know these two parts of our own self, then in our relationships they can become healthy. We will not take personally every tiny little look on this man's face. If you've got a lot of emotional neediness, a lot of an attachment to being seen as a lovely girl, even as soon as he looks a bit ugly when he comes home from work, you have a panic attack. Oh, what have I done wrong? Whereas if you have more contentment in yourself, you don't take it all personally. Give the man a break. Let him feel miserable, It's not always personal. But if we have constant attachment to being seen as a nice girl, we'll take everything the other person does personally. And that's exhausting. That's like your mummy. Your poor darling mummy always feels dissatisfied. No matter how much time you give her, it's never enough. Oh, you don't love me. No matter how often you call her, it's never enough. How much you stay when you visit, it's never enough. We know that in some people, and that's like a vampire, and that sucks your blood dry, When we understand that's the person's attachment, you could lie in your mother's bed 24 hours a day and feed her your blood. She still won't be happy, because her attachment to being loved and approved of is a bottomless pit of misery. So when we see that in all of ourselves, then we can begin to understand how to be wise friends as well. I'm saying a lot of things here, Cassia. I don't know. Does it make sense what I'm saying, darling? Yeah,
it does. I think I'm discovering a lot of neuroses about myself, and anxiety goes very deep too. So
that's it, darling. Anxiety. Actually, let's look at anxiety, because it's a common word we all use. Anxiety is like mild panic attack, really, isn't it? It's a mild panic attack. When you're shouting and yelling and hyperventilating, that's extreme anxiety. So we have mild anxiety. It's a panic attack all the time. So the analysis of that is attachment, because attachment's multifaceted. Attachment is an emotional hunger that feels it's missing something. So then also attachment has the function, depending on the kind of mind we have, it has a function of always of controlling and manipulating. We'd say, oh, she's a real control freak. That's the particular way that attachment functions. And some people with their attachment, they just eat their cake all day and stay there like a big glob, Some people are out there like little vampires trying to control everything to make it what I think I want, to make me happy. That's attachment. That's the control freak. And an attachment has that function. So then, always trying to make the person do what you want. It's also instinctive. It's all so completely primordial inside us, So we've got to see the aspect. Attachment is emotional hunger. Attachment's dissatisfaction. Attachment then gives rise, when it doesn't get what it wants, which could be 1,000 times a second, gives rise to anger. So that means always finding fault, always being critical. And that means with ourselves as well. I'm no good. It's no good. That's no good. He's wrong. She's wrong. And then you control to change it. I mean, it's exhausting, It depends on our personality. It functions in many different ways, depending on our other qualities, So we've got to see our own minds so well. And the key point the Buddha's making, these are the states of mind that make us painful, make us miserable, but they're not set in stone. And the more we become familiar with them, the more we can heal them, And of course, it sounds easy, but this is slowly getting a practice and developing this. And then we slowly become healed, meaning
You're muted, Venerable.
means once we've given up attachment, we can be much cleaner in our relationships and more easily able to see the minds of others and know how to help them. And we'll be wise friends. So, you know, even we talk about having, you know, your therapist is supposed to have some wisdom to help you see your mind. Well, in the end, we all should be like that with each other in our relationships. As a mother, you should see the mind of your child and know the wisest way to be. But that you can't do that if you don't know your own mind. So even in your own relationships, you might have a friend who's always ringing you up and always gets upset easily if you don't say the right word. It's because they've got attachment to be approved of all the time. So when you know that, you love them, and then, you know, but you can't make them happy. They've got to find the way to make themselves happy. But we have to see that we've all got this, you know, we've all got this, Cassia, to some degree or another. And the less we have it, the more content we are, and the more kind and wise we are with others, you know. Are we communicating, darling?
Yes, thank you so much.
Good. Anybody else? Anyone? What's the point there? Yes, Hillary.
Hi, we have a question in chat.
Good.
Another question about attachment, and this time it's about physical connection, sex.
Yes. So what's the question?
Well, it's in the chat. That's all they said. I guess it's about how to deal with physical attachment as opposed to.
No, that's very interesting. Yeah, no, I understand. We've all got, I mean, attachment is limitless in its capacity to find an object. You understand? That's the point. And we've all got different personalities, you know? So first of all, it's sort of like, you know, attachment to whatever object it is from the habit. So that's the Buddhist view about karma. If the person, I don't know who's asking the question, but the bigger picture is we come into this life, and we can see this. We come into this life programmed, you know, we tend to think it's for mummy and daddy and the grandma and the grandpa and the monkeys, not for the Buddha. We're programmed with our own tendencies. So some people come into this life with a tendency to be attached to food. Some people come into this life even as little children, attached to this idea of, you know, as you get older, this idea of sex, and we think of the object all the time. So one of the signs in our own mind of attachment is when we think of the object all the time. So for most of us, food's pretty common. I've rarely met a person who's not attached to food, you know. So we always think about food. You think about what you're going to have for breakfast, then you think about what you're going to have for lunch, then you think about what you want next and another snack, and then you think about you won't have this and you will have that, and you go shopping, then you have dinner, then you go out. I mean, food is pretty predominant. Now, some people are attached to their video games, you know. They mightn't be so much attached to sex or food for that matter, but they spend their 5-6 hours a day on their video games. Some people watch porn 5-6 hours a day. Some people, you know, go online and buy things 5-6 times a day. So attachment's limitless in its capacity to glom onto an object. And the object that we get connected to is due to the habit. If we brought that with us, the Buddha's view, that's one point. We brought that habit with us. So then, because the sex one is so intense, because it's the body, you know, I mean, when you watch video games, you're not going to have orgasms, you know, it's unlikely. But now I'm not trying to be too gross here, but let's understand the mechanics again of the body and the mind, you know. Pleasant feelings are simply just the way the body is existing. The mind and the body combine together, depending on the karma and the habit. You meet certain objects and it triggers a pleasant feeling. Some people it's cake. Some people it's a physical body, what we call sex. Some people it's stealing. Some people it's killing. Some people it's torturing. Or at least be happy that, you know, if you're not a rapist, you're not going harming people, that at least you don't want to harm people. I mean, one of my friends on death row in Kentucky, my friend Mitchell, who's a Buddhist, he tells me, because they all go to Mitchell, he's like their friend on death row. He takes care of everybody. There's about 40 of them. He said, this guy, and I know this fellow, he comes to the teachings when I go, he's very relaxed, easygoing looking. But as Mitchell said, Robina, he thinks of torture all the time. Now, can you imagine having that karmic tendency to wake up in this life with no understanding? Your mummy didn't teach you, you know, your mummy didn't teach you, or a little boy who since as soon as he went fishing, he falls in love with fishing. Another person falls in love with food. I mean, I fell in love with food. Food for me has always been the attachment. I can remember, you know, like we had 7 kids. One time I was little, my mother had 7 kids in about 8 years. And when she served out all the dinner, I mean, if one person got one more pea, I'd have a panic attack, you know. We had to be equal in how much food we got. And we had a brother, he was the 8th child. My mother always gave him more food. I cannot tell you the dramas. It was so hilarious. I feel offended that Tony would dare get more food than the girls, you know. I was panic attacked. Anyway, never mind, just joking. So attachment is a habit, and it's a habit. Which object it is the habit. And you bring it from past lives. Buddha would say this. Your mummy didn't teach you. It's pretty evident. So can you imagine, though, the suffering of having torture in your mind all the time? I mean, we don't understand this in our culture. We just think the guy should be on death row. I hope he dies. You know, we don't understand why. But this is what attachment is. So one of the signs of attachment is it's on your mind all the time. So people are always lonely. People are always thinking about no one loves me. They're the ones who are hungry for approval and never seeming to get it. You know, some people attachment, no sex, couldn't care about food, couldn't care about sex, but obsessed with getting everybody to say and do what they want. They want to control every single tiny event in the universe. That's attachment again, trying to control it all to make it what I want. So all our attachments are so different depending on our habits. So the sexual one is very intense because it involves intense experiences of pleasure in the body. And this is what's fascinating. The extent of the pleasure triggered in your mind and physical body, which is your sensory consciousness, the extent of the pleasure triggered by contact with whatever object it might be is the extent of that habit from the past. So, you know, for example, I always remember reading, time to go soon. I remember I always quote this, an Australian journalist, he's dead now, a writer. He was the arts writer for the Time magazine for like 40 years, an Australian fellow called Robert Hughes. Very intelligent, very brilliant scholar, you know, all these things. But he was totally attached to fishing. He talked about how, and because he was a good writer, he talked lyrically about how when he first went trout fishing, he had like a cosmic experience. Now, please hear this. A person who has the best sex on the planet, the best pleasure will be triggered. So, of course, we think it's some kind of religious thing. We think it's a gift from God. God knows what we think about it. It just means we've got that much habit. And, of course, sex is an intense habit. Animals, look at animals. They live according to it, you know. Some little monkeys, some kind of ape or monkey or orangutan, I don't know what it was I read about, particularly powerful attachment to sex from past lives. So he gets born as a little creature, and as soon as he comes out of his mummy's womb, he turns around and has sex with his mummy and his daddy and his grandma and his grandpa and his auntie and his uncle. So that's really attached to sex. That's habit. It's habit. So, of course, we all know if the habit is painful, if you've got this addiction to constantly trying to make everything nice and constantly having a panic attack because it's not nice, you'll be in a state of anxiety nonstop. That's attachment working overtime. Some people think of food all the time. You know, some people think of sex all the time. See, in all these cases, it's just habit. And then you have to analyze what attachment is. Attachment's key function is to exaggerate the deliciousness of that object. So one of the powerful antidotes, and this, of course, it takes an enormous amount of time when the habit is so strong, is to analyze how what attachment is seeing when it sees that divine body is not the body that's there. And we all know this is true. I mean, I think of a friend of mine. I always quote him. He gave me permission to tell his stories. He's Greek. And when he was 6 years old, he told me, walking down the street, you know, with his mummy in Athens, and his strict, you know, Greek Orthodox mummy, and he looks up and he sees a half-naked lady on the poster at the cinema. And he said, "Mummy, why is my penis standing up?" Of course, mummy was mortified, and the theatre lady cracked a joke and said, "Oh, you know, he's going to be a lady killer." And of course, otherwise, he was attached to sex, just like you're talking. Since he's a little boy, he didn't understand anything. So there's logical reasons, like mechanical reasons why that is, because the habit in his mind, he didn't know it was there, but the second the object appeared, it's like it woke up his habits, you know, it woke up, so it triggered pleasure. The same as a little boy who, when he first went fishing and spent all his life being a fisherman, as soon as he went fishing, he fell in love with fishing. So it triggered pleasant feelings. And of course, because if it triggers pleasant feelings, attachment kicks in and exaggerates the deliciousness of the fishing, the deliciousness of the torture, the deliciousness of the sex, of the body, whatever body it is. And then we buy into that story, and then we're locked into this pattern. So it's a habit, and it's hard to break it. But one of the key ones is to start to realize it's a lie. The feelings are real because it's habit, but the story, you know, that it tells us that body is divine, and the point is we got to use logic to argue with it. I mean, with my friend Panos, you know, even when he saved up his first money for, when he first was given money, he saved it up when he was 12 or 13. He didn't go and buy a toy train. He went to the prostitutes. He had great fun going to the prostitutes. I'm not being critical here. I'm just talking. He's a very lovely man, He just was attached to sex with girls. Now, this is the interesting point. And this is logical proof. One of the teachings is a wonderful book I really recommend to any of you. It's an incredible book. Rinpoche asked me a couple of years ago to put it together. It's a compilation of all his letters to prisoners, more than 100 letters over the last 20 years, more than that. And it's an amazing book, and it's called, I'd send you the link. I'll send you the link to Mary, and you'll find it. It's an amazing, and the chapter, especially on attachment, is amazing, because one of the guys who wrote to him, he got like a 45-page letter in response, and a lot of the teachings on attachment to sex are in the teachings, and all the logic to show how attachment is a liar. So like, for example, it's obvious if you're in love with somebody at the beginning and you just love having sex with them and their body looks so divine to you, but perfectly well a month later, 6 months later, or when they get old and fat and wrinkled and ugly and you can't stand the sight of them, then where's all the attraction gone? You can't stand the thought of this person anymore. It's the same person, even if it's a month later, nothing's changed. So we have to use logic to see it's not true. But of course, it takes time, because if attachment is strong, you're thinking of the object all the time. It's not an overnight job, but we've got to understand the mechanics of it. But this book of Rinpoche's, it's called, I'll just get the link and I'll send it to Mary right now. It's for prisoners, but oh, you're all gone again. What happened? No, you're still there. Okay. Hang on. What's it called? Enjoy. There it is. Enjoy life, liberated from the inner prison. That's just the first part. It's got a second part as well. That's what Rinpoche wanted to call the book. I'll send the link to Mary now. It's a brilliant book. I cannot tell you. And it's a fundraiser for the prison project. You can offer whatever you like for it. $5, $100, whatever you wish. I'll send the link. It's an amazing book. I highly recommend it. Here it is to Mary Camille. There she is. There it is, honey. Put it online, and I recommend it. And it's a fundraiser for the prison project. It's great. Just click on get the book, offer your money, and you'll get a digital book, or you can get the book sent to you. It's brilliant. An incredible chapter on attachment in it, in relation in particular to sex, but to everything. That's my long answer. And it's time to go. Unless there are any more urgent questions. That's enough, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, petals. Thank you, darlings. Food for thought for 1 hour. Anything there that's useful, take it, put it into practice, and just keep moving one little step at a time on your marvelous journey of molding your mind to the mind of a marvelous being, with the wisdom wing and the cash and passion wing fully developed, so you can be a benefit to others, so you can be content and happy within yourself. That's the bottom line, okay? Thank you, precious ones. Thank you, darling Mary. Thank you, Hilary. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.